Call of Duty, one of the highest grossing and most successful franchises of all time, but also a constant polarizing and volatile once-a-year entry in the gaming world. Will Gulf War save the Call of Duty franchise? I guess the first question should be, does Call of Duty need saving? Well, according to the numbers, it doesn't really seem like it. This graph shows the sales for each COD by copy in the millions, and although we don't have numbers for the most recent titles yet, we see the latest 3 entries, Vanguard, Cold War, and MW 2019, are all in the top 5 selling CODs to date. But let's put the numbers aside for a sec. I'm willing to bet that at least 90% of players would agree that Call of Duty is either already trash or going downhill quick. To add to my point, let's take a trip back down memory lane and just listen to some clips from some of the heights of the franchise.
Friendly Predator missile inbound.
Hunter-killer drone deployed. UAV on standby.
We got more enemy personnel. Friendly Apache inbound.
I mean, when is the last time you felt a rush of adrenaline like you did every time when hearing Ghost call out,
Friendly Apache inbound.
while proceeding to mow down the enemy team for the next minute? Or the genuine fear when chilling in a game with your buddies and suddenly you hear,
Enemy AC-130 above!
COD seems to have lost some of its magic over the years, so what can Gulf War do to save it? When you think of modern Call of Duty, campaign is probably the furthest thing from your mind. It's a single player mode you may hop into to get used to the game mechanics before hopping into your first game of multiplayer. But that wasn't always the case. Back in the day, nearly every mission had you on edge, the gripping story to follow, characters you love, gameplay that will make your heart pound so hard you think it may fall out of your chest, and then once you get your breath, it'll just get ripped out anyway. It had storylines so intriguing that video essays were made for each character, and it had such a chokehold on you that once you finished, you probably just sat through the credits thinking, now what? On the other hand, modern Call of Duty has put campaign on the back burner. Rather than leaving us deep in thought wondering what to do next with our lives after those breathtaking stories were over, most of us have been left with a thought of, that's it? So what is Gulf War gonna do to combat that? Well, we honestly don't know much about the campaign quite yet. Other than that it's open world, it contains returning Black Ops characters like Adler, and is being developed by Raven Software. As we know, Gulf War has had 4 years of development, the most of any COD to date. The hopes are extremely high for the story mode this time around. Raven Software seems to have a pretty good track record within the community, and has assisted with making nearly every COD since Black Ops. Open world campaigns in Call of Duty have been a recent experiment with last year's MW3 release, which honestly received extremely heavy criticism. However, I'm hopeful that most of the flaws were due to time constraints. I think that time shortages are a common theme each year, which is why the 4-year development time for Gulf War has hopes set so high. Will it return Black Ops and Call of Duty as a whole to its former glory, or will it just be another entry into the downfall of the once great Call of Duty campaign mode? Call of Duty Zombies, the iconic third mode that started as a side project for developers and quickly grew into a massive community of players and die-hard story lovers rivaling that of multiplayer and campaign themselves. Unfortunately, the story is one we've heard before, just a few minutes ago in fact. It's very similar to campaign. Zombies has lost its aura. At its peak, it was a multifaceted genre consisting of cinematic storytelling, eerily horrifying settings, iconic voice acting,
So you're dead now, but you were dead before! Ah, fuck you!
and intense zombie slaying action. Now it's an NPC-filled, spoon-fed story, camo grind simulator that has one copy-paste map in the entire life cycle of the game. I do understand that this year it was rushed and underfunded, so no shade to the game developers at all. They definitely did their best with the circumstances. But I think the fact that it's underfunded speaks volumes as to why Call of Duty is in the state it's in now. How is it that one of the most beloved game modes is underfunded? Even within Cold War, the last quote-unquote real zombies game with round-based maps, the vibes were just off. And don't get me wrong, Cold War is 1000% better than what we have this year, but the feeling of zombies is just nowhere near the level it once was. I mean, just look at the screen. It's overloaded with unnecessary information and has absolutely no character. It may seem like a small and unimportant thing, but it's something you're looking at for every second of the game. Little things like that begin to really add up when you throw in the zombie health bars, minimap, medals popping up for killing zombies, and the list goes on. In recent Call of Duty titles, Zombies has lost that feeling of hopelessness. With the addition of live enemy characters that shoot back at you, it forces the fact on you that the world has not really been overrun by zombies. And whenever you've had enough, or start to get overrun, you can just exfil out and be a-okay. While exfils have added a unique and sometimes fun aspect to the game, I think that at the end of the day, it takes away from the main point of historic COD Zombies. You don't have hope. Although that seems like something you don't want to feel while playing a game for fun, I do think Zombies is one case where it's almost necessary for the immersion. So I'm going to talk about some distinct aspects of old Zombies to prove my point. I used to genuinely be scared to play by myself growing up. And even now, it still is extremely creepy without music or a video playing in the background. I mean, just picture yourself playing Verrucht, Noct, 5, or any number of maps from back in the day and tell me you wouldn't be a little freaked out at least once. I quite literally grew up with zombies, so I was a little 8-year-old playing Noct for the first time after that horrifying cutscene popped up after the campaign. I left the game almost immediately and didn't pick Call of Duty back up for weeks after that. So obviously, being over 20 now, it's a little hard to compare that genuine terror with the fear you would feel today, but the point does still stand. It doesn't feel like it's zombies anymore. It's almost like an arcade game trying to build up points. So on to my next point. I vividly remember watching NoAJ456, Mr. T-Lexify, and Mr. Raffle Waffles, shout out to them by the way, love y'all, all hunting for Easter eggs on day one of a new map in school. I would rush through my homework and put my headphones in immediately to see if any new steps had been found, and then once I got home I would immediately throw on a no-nonsense guide so I could do it myself. And sometimes I never did succeed. My friends weren't really into zombies, so I couldn't always do it solo, and I also just wasn't that good yet, but it did keep me playing, and when I finally did beat a map like Origins for the first time, I felt like I was on top of the world. Fast forward to Cold War release, and the Easter egg was found almost immediately. The steps are basically handed to you by the narrators, and I went home to try it for myself and beat it in an hour with a buddy who had quite literally never played one game of zombies before. I'm not sure that I ever played the map again besides working for camos, so I guess my point is, the game is just too easy now, overall and the Easter eggs as well. It wasn't a big deal to hop in a game and pay little to no attention while grinding camos through the rounds, and you look up and realize you're on round 50 plus. Used to, that was a massive feat, and something you could brag about to your friends. I'm not saying we need to go back to the Verrucht and 5 levels of difficulty, but it almost feels boring when I know I can just run around halfway paying attention and will likely only die when I decide to. I feel like it's unfair to completely disregard the Dark Ether story as it hasn't fully run its course quite yet, so I'm going to focus mainly on the Ether storyline. First, the modem through which the story is told was just perfect. Getting little glimpses into the characters and their thoughts through dialogue, the ambience and setting of the maps themselves, telling massive aspects of the story with no words at all, getting filled in bit by bit with each new radio found, and not to mention how amazing some of those radios' voice acting were.
Now, you must be very diligent, Mr. Samantha. Owning a dog is a great responsibility.
Yes, Father. Oh, I love her.
You must feed her every day and walk her, and be very careful when you play with her. You know she's going to have puppies.
Really? Can I keep the puppies too, Father?
We'll see, Samantha. One step at a time.
The added snippets of ciphers and side Easter eggs, and finally culminating that story through completing the main Easter eggs in each map. The story couldn't have been told in a more gripping way. I mean, it had millions of us watching hours and hours of videos of breakdowns of these radios, what the Easter eggs meant, and theory crafting for what would happen next. Now, the story is shoved in our faces by obvious dialogue, radios that drone on and leave nothing to the imagination, and maps that have little character on their own. So again, we don't know much about Gulf War Zombies yet. Basically, we do know that it will be bringing back round-based maps, and will likely continue the Dark Ether story. Like campaign, the bar is extremely high because of the 4-year development time, so I'm really hoping that they can revive the atmosphere of zombies. While I don't love the addition of things like the minimap on the HUD for zombies, the least they can do is add like a border that makes it clear that you're playing zombies, which would add immersion to your gameplay, and maybe they could add some backstory as to why we're plating up like we do in Warzone. I wouldn't mind a well thought out buildable that allowed us to add armor to our character, but with the current workbench playstyle and in-game menus, it just takes out of the zombies experience. So with all that said, there is a lot of work to do if Gulf War is going to bring Call of Duty Zombies back from the dead, but if any game is going to do it, I think it'll be Black Ops 5. The mode that popularized the franchise, making it a household name and one of the highest selling video games in history. Whether it's trying your hand in free-for-all, playing the objective on hardpoint, hopping in a relaxed game of team deathmatch with your buddies, or climbing the ladder in ranked, multiplayer has something for everyone. Getting your first nuke on a game rivals the feeling of beating the campaign on veteran or beating the hardest zombies Easter eggs solo. And although a lot would argue that Call of Duty has fallen off lately, millions still buy the game just for multiplayer. So, if this mode is the reason Call of Duty is still topping the charts each year, it has to be good, right? Well, even though it's likely the reason over 90% of people still buy the game, most would argue that it doesn't rise to the same level of previous titles. But why is that? We're going to dive into some reasons why I think that may be the case. A lot of Call of Duty players enjoy multiplayer so much because of their completionist mindset. They want to rank up and unlock every camo as quickly as possible. So in a game where getting XP comes with playing, and completing challenges while playing also gets you camos, what could go wrong? Well, leveling up isn't what it once was in Call of Duty. As of now, you level up in a linear fashion with new quote-unquote levels being released with each new season of the game. So you're limited to, say, level 650 for a couple months if you get there early on in the season. And what comes with being level 650? Well, basically nothing. You may get an emblem or a calling card, but that's about it. With the old prestige system, it provided just that, prestige, for leveling up. The old system had you get to a level cap, say level 55 for example. Then once you got to that level, you had a choice. You could either stay there forever with everything unlocked, or you could prestige, resetting your level to 1 and resetting your unlocks back to as if you were level 1. But now you had the prestige 1 icon next to your gamer tag. In some games, you got 1 prestige token to spend on an item, attachment, perk, gun, etc. that you could use permanently to unlock that item, even at level 1. This added a fun decision-making aspect to the game that kept leveling up interesting. It wasn't so linear and stale like it is now. You actually had to make sacrifices to progress to max prestige, resetting over and over until you finally got that final prestige badge. It meant something. And now I couldn't care less whether I'm level 60 or level 600. Everything stays unlocked and all I get is a little emblem or something like that every 50 levels, which they still call prestiges. And to that point, Calling cards and emblems used to mean something. Once again, a lot of challenges were actually difficult, so some titles and emblems made you respect the player that had them without even playing against them yet. Now, you're overloaded with them, from free store packs, battle pass items, paid animating calling cards, and much more. Most of the coolest ones are locked behind paid bundles, so even if the enemy does have a cool calling card, it likely just means they had $20 more than you. I get that microtransactions are almost certainly here to stay, but even still, there are almost no calling cards that I'm like, I really want that. Like, I've dropped 5 or 6 nukes in the game, and I don't even think I got a calling card or emblem for that. I do want to give props to Cold War because they had some good calling cards with crazy challenges like drop a nuke with 21 different weapons. Like, that's something that would keep me playing constantly, trying to get it, and I hope that we can implement more stuff like that in the future. As for Gulf War, I feel like the progression isn't hard to fix. We can still have paid bundles and a battle pass and seasons, but simply bringing back the old prestige system along with calling cards and emblems that mean something, I think will help to bring back some of the old joy of playing Call of Duty. I think with gameplay, we as players honestly deserve as much of the blame as developers. Although skill-based matchmaking can ruin the fun a lot of the time, and somehow we still haven't figured out how to fix spawn logic on maps that are being reused every year and are 15 years old, but the player base for COD is just different than it once was. Everyone wants to be the best. A small minority plays for fun now, with everyone else using meta weapons 24/7 and slide canceling out of their minds. I mean, me included. I think with the rise of YouTube, the average player started to look up the best weapons and attachments, along with tips for movement and gun skill, and started to improve extremely quickly. With skill-based matchmaking on top of that, hopping into a game with friends to have a chill night is almost non-existent. Either some friends will be getting absolutely destroyed, or one person will be taking all the kills if you get an easy lobby. Although I don't think skill-based will go away entirely, I really don't see the need for it with ranked play being a thing. At least for me, I only play ranked unless I'm trying to unlock something or try new weapons out. And I think this goes back to the progression thing. I would be playing multiplayer a lot more if there was something like a 21 nuke challenges with rewards to keep me going. But with skill based, that feat would likely be borderline impossible. I'm not sure what the answer is to fix this conundrum, but I'm hoping Gulf War can bring back some of the joy and lightheartedness of casual multiplayer. What is the last truly iconic original Call of Duty map that comes to mind? I'm not necessarily talking about which ones played the best, just based off of memorability. Rust, Nuketown, Terminal, Raid, Crash, Firing Range, and High Rise all come to mind for me. Obviously there are others that may be on your list, but my point is they're all likely 10 plus years old. So what happened to Call of Duty map making? I feel like modern day maps are just trying too hard. They want the maps to play perfectly for competitive and still provide the casual experience, but they get caught up on making lanes that flow well and spend less time on making the map interesting. There are definitely some maps that we may look back on in a few years from current CODs that have that iconic factor. There were so many distinct entries every year without fail in the past, like Dome, Kowloon, Grind, Carnival, Sandbox, Summit, Rush, and so many more. I get that not every game is going to have the creative freedom to have bright colors everywhere or futuristic elements, but I think that modern games are just lacking in the creative department. Same question. What is the last iconic gun you remember? And ask yourself, was that gun a remake? Again, not the best or most OP gun, just which one do you think of when you think of COD? For me, it's the Intervention, DSR, BAL, ASM1, and FAMAS. There are so many more unique ones that come to mind, like the VMP, NA45, Executioner, Chainsaw, Blunderbuss, and again, so many more. Obviously, most guns in Call of Duty are based on real weapons, like the M16, so it's hard to call that a remake, but how many new and unique weapons are in COD? Most DLC weapons now are just remakes of the greats of the past. I think once again, the creative passion of Call of Duty has dwindled over the years. It doesn't need to be an entirely made up and new weapon, but things like the Intervention's sound and the ASM1's sight are unique aspects that can make a gun stand out, rather than just plain and repeated sounds or sight assets. This is just another aspect of the game that I hope Gulf War doesn't neglect and disregard. Not all of the competitive scene downward trend falls on Call of Duty itself. Some outside aspects, like the implementation of the CDL, has held back growth and viewership. Online events have also cut down a lot of the hype of the modern competitive scene. There is definitely no shortage of talent in the competitive scene currently, even with the retirement of the GOATs like Scump, Karma, Formal, and so many more. I think that COD can do better with the things they can control, like game modes, maps, and spawn logic. Early competitive matches for MW3 were often pretty stale, sometimes seeing the same 3 maps in a row, and that map being a recycled one from over a decade ago. Additionally, even 6 months into the game, the developers still haven't fixed bugs like the propane tanks on High Rise taking out entire teams from across the map. The competitive scene does bring a huge and dedicated player base to the game, so it's important for Gulf War to not neglect this side of the community. Call of Duty isn't the same as it once was, but to be fair, neither are we. Most of us criticizing the game aren't kids anymore, coming home from school after daydreaming about Black Ops 2 all day long, or waking up at 6 AM to get a quick game of zombies in before the bus came. We don't all have endless hours to pour into the game to attach those core memories that we once made with each and every game. So, although Call of Duty seems to be putting less effort into what the gamers want, before we write off Gulf War as another entry into the downfall of the once titanic franchise we all know and love, we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, are we giving them a fair chance?